This is a Hot Pie Original.
This would qualify. There's a little bit of a strategic reason for doing this right now, but it's topical either way. This would be, for those that don't know, I created, like most things that I do, in the moment, a segment. I call it 6 minutes of football, even though it's really not 6 minutes. I have no idea. I just call it that just because in my mind I had this vision that sort of the attention span of someone for any segment, but in particular football segment, might be 6 minutes. So that's where it came from. So deal with it. But it's well beyond football. He's an interesting career, an interesting person, and where he's going now is even more interesting. There's not very many football players that you can say are interesting. You know, they're pretty Tom Brady-like, right? It's pretty simple. They want it to be simple, and that's okay. There's not many that you could ever say are all that interesting, and certainly cutting edge and ahead of the curve. So I'll start by saying this because he went there. I grew up in Austin going to Texas football games. I used to wrap my Christmas presents as a kid growing up in Texas football newspaper stories. Okay? I think I did entire gifts wrapped just in Earl Campbell stories. I grew up gathering plastic cups in the end zone section of what used to be Memorial Stadium, and it used to be called the Knot Hole. So I go way back. And with that as perspective of my life of following Texas football and growing up following Texas football and all my experience with Texas football, it's hard for me to do this because I never thought, I mean, it was just impossible. And I get that debating about the greatness of football players is the ultimate barstool conversation. It's not life and death. It's not war. It's none of the stuff that we've talked about already. It's just simple, fun debate. But I never thought that I would say that there would be a greater player at the University of Texas. The long history of great football. I know it's been mediocre, but there's a long history of greatness. I never thought I would think, or anybody else that knows football would say that there's ever been a greater player at Texas than Earl Campbell. I mean, it just still feels icky for me to even say that because to me, that's the most dominating, unbelievable player still to this day. But truthfully, there's a better player. I mean, it's a much better player. I mean, Vince Young may have had the greatest season. Of course, this is all debatable. But he may have had the greatest season of any player at Texas. Tommy Nobis played before I was even born, but Tommy Nobis may have been the most game-changing and influential football player ever at Texas. Right? That's how I could break it down. But Ricky Williams' total body of work made him the best player ever at Texas. I don't think there's many arguments against. The weird part is the argument against is not about the player. His body of work doesn't just make him the best all-around player ever at Texas. He's on the short list. Easily on the short list of 2, 3, or 4 of the best running backs ever to play the college game. And I don't even know that you might not put him in number 1, but whatever. He won a Heisman Trophy, put up more than 6,200 yards. He had a ridiculous number of 75 touchdowns. Okay? That's just a ridiculous number. But he also played 2 positions. He caught passes, and he was a blocker. When you go look back at the history of Earl Campbell, it is one spectacular season in which he was moved from what used to be a fullback to a tailback. I mean, it was built for him to have a great season. So it's not fair to say the totality of Earl Campbell's career it can't compare because he didn't have the options. But Ricky Williams did it over a long period of time. The body of work is almost untouchable. The body of work over a career. It really is. And how good of a player he was, not just catching the ball, but blocking too. I mean, the guy played fullback for a while. So to me, it's the best career ever at Texas. And I don't know that I'll say that again. John McClellan is the co-founder and creator of ATX Hot Sauce, now in all 50 states and several retail outlets as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to let this social media rock star chef walk us through 4 different sauces, and then I'll taste and we'll tell everyone why they should buy. You can give the science behind these, and then I'll make the simple recommendation. Go to atxhotsauce.com. All right,
I don't think anybody's heard the website.
Yeah, I know.
About you, Jeff, but it is atxhotsauce.com.
I'll say
I got that one right.
45 times, atxhotsauce.com. So let's do it.
I brought 4 flavors here, and we're going to test your palate today.
Okay.
And I only brought 4 because I didn't think you could handle 5 or 6.
Yes,
probably a smart move. Yeah. And so the first one we're going to try here, it's called Beet Heat. And just like the name implies, it has beets in it. It's made with red Fresno peppers. Red Fresnos are red peppers that are they're hotter than a jalapeno and a little bit less than a serrano. So not super hot here, just a lot of good, really good flavor. So we're going to start with this one, and then we're going to move up the chain.
Okay. I've had the Beet Heat, but okay.
Yeah, we're going to try it though.
It goes well with a cab. All right, Jeff's savoring Beet Heat.
I'll even do it with you, so that should be all right. Now remember, it is hot sauce.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's hot sauce. Trust me, man.
Wait, is that one hot to you?
No. A little.
Yeah. The great thing with the fermentation process is you get a bunch of the flavor right up front.
Yeah.
And then the heat comes, but then it dissipates pretty quickly, especially with the red Fresnos. You know, this is not a very spicy one, but it is a very tasty one. Goes on great on sandwiches.
Beet Heat.
Beet Heat. B-E-E-T. Heat.
All right. Go to atxhotsauce.com.
That's right.
It took me a long time to say there'd be another player better than Earl Campbell. And I know people make the argument for Vince Young. I know, but that was a one-off. That was a spectacular, dominating season. Ricky Williams did it over a long period of time and did it in a variety of ways. So I don't need to be long-winded, but he was that great of a player, and the numbers are that spectacular. So, but his career, here's the fascinating part about him now in particular, because he's saying stuff now that's really interesting, and he's an interesting guy. Really is. You break his career into 3 parts, I think. The incredible college career, untouchable, the best ever at Texas. Then you go to a pretty good, and people don't even realize this, a pretty good NFL career that was mostly canceled out by suspensions. His pro career is defined by suspensions. And then the other part of him is the sort of ahead of his time, Zen-like way of self-medicating himself that is pretty interesting. And I say ahead of its time, right? So he's got a Heisman Trophy to show for it. Fine. But his greatness is overshadowed by his weird NFL career because he was weird. in an industry that doesn't tolerate weird. It doesn't tolerate Zen-like. It doesn't. Now, today, I think we would. I think he would. It's a shame. And I think he's now talking about this because he's now out doing interviews and talking. I would love to have him on the show. I think we will. Of him saying, I would have been a Hall of Fame player. He would have. Absolutely. Bo Jackson's the most amazing player at running back ever. I mean, I can't argue about Jim Brown. I can't. And I played against Bo Jackson. It's just the most astonishing person I've ever seen on a football field. But Ricky Williams would have been, I'd say the same thing about Ricky Williams that I would say about Bo Jackson. Had he been able to complete a body of work, you'd be talking about a Hall of Famer and one of the 2 best ever to play the game. And he's even saying it now. Had I not been suspended so often, I'd be in the Hall of Fame. Now, I know people are going to turn around, myself included, and say, hey, dude, you didn't have to do the weed. But nobody ever bothered to listen to his reasons. Nobody ever bothered to listen to him think it through. Nobody ever bothered to listen to a guy say, I'm doing what we all should do, and that is a healthy self-medicating, not chemical medicating. He's every argument in the modern argument about weed, and he was doing it 20 years ago. So I think it's interesting. He's now coming out and now going public and now frustrated. And he did it. He willingly got suspended over and over again because of NFL drug policies. He ended up missing an entire season because he was stubborn enough to keep smoking, right? Or doing the gummies or whatever he would do. So that's true. And I think he owns that. But I think he's right that if he were around, the game is different already, but if he were around today, there'd be more tolerance. And he had he been able to finish and not get suspended all the time, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. He's right. And he's right. I think people are going to be pissed off that he says it. I think people are going to be pissed off and say, oh, buddy, you did it to yourself. He did. But I think you ought to be fair at the same time and say, all he was trying to argue at the time was, let me take care of my body. Let me take care of my body that's not a bunch of chemicals. Let me try to self-medicate in a way that's much healthier. And he kept getting him kicked out of the league. And it ruined, I think he's right, what would have been a Hall of Fame career. I mean, football-wise, and I'm not even, people are going to say you're exaggerating. I don't do this often when it comes to football, and I know what I'm talking about, by the way. Football-wise, he was, and they didn't have the skill set of him. He was Earl Campbell mixes with Eric Dickerson. He was the power back who could also be a slasher. Eric Dickerson was the greatest slasher the game has ever seen. Earl Campbell's the greatest power back, maybe outside of Jim Brown, the game has ever seen. I don't know of anybody that was those two and could catch passes. So, if you're wondering why he's in the news and why I'm even commenting about it, it's because he's in the news. And he's in the news because it's sort of like, hey, take a look back in my career. I'm a little bit disappointed. I lived the way I wanted to live. And had I not been suspended so often, I would have been in the Hall of Fame. And judge him all you want, I think he's right.